This morning, Mark Carney walked into a meeting in Vancouver that could literally decide the future of Canada's energy ambitions for the next decade. The man sitting across from him was BC Premier David Eby, and Eby didn't come empty-handed. He brought a list, a very clear demand, and $88 billion worth of leverage that Carney simply can't ignore. We're talking about a massive 1 million barrel per day pipeline from Alberta's oil sands all the way to Canada's west coast, opening up new markets in Asia. This isn't just another infrastructure project. This is potentially game-changing for the entire country, but it all hinges on what happens in British Columbia. And today, Eby made it crystal clear. BC wants the same kind of deal that Alberta just got. If you care about Canada's economy, jobs, or even how we position ourselves against the United States in these tense trade talks, you need to pay attention to what unfolds next. To really understand why this meeting is such a big deal, let's rewind just a few days. Last Friday in Calgary, Mark Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith struck an agreement that set a hard construction start date of September 2027 for this ambitious pipeline. They set a proposal deadline of July 1st for Alberta to get everything into the Federal Major Projects Office. They even locked in a carbon pricing framework that climbs to $130 per ton by 2035. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce called it historic, and on paper, it sounded like a huge win for getting Canadian energy to Tidewater. But here's what that agreement didn't include, and this is crucial. It didn't include any specific route. And guess what? Every single possible route for a West Coast pipeline has to cross through British Columbia. There's simply no way around it. You can't get from Alberta's oil fields to the Pacific Ocean without going through BC's land, its rivers, its communities, and its indigenous territories. David Eby wasn't in the room in Calgary, and he noticed immediately. Within hours, he called the deal a reward for Alberta's bad behavior, pointing straight at the separatist tensions that he believes forced Ottawa to negotiate only with Danielle Smith. Eby pointed out that British Columbia already has 35 shovel-ready projects sitting there, projects backed by private money, with confirmed routes and Indigenous support. And he said he was bringing that list straight to Carney today. This isn't just talk. This is BC saying, hey, if you're going to move fast on Alberta's pipeline, you better show the same energy for us. Now, let's talk about what that $88 billion actually means, because those numbers aren't thrown around lightly. Those 34 major projects currently in the Federal Major Projects Office represent about 40% of the entire national pipeline portfolio. Every single one of them is in British Columbia. They have private proponents ready to go. They have defined routes. They're waiting for the same federal push that Carney gave Alberta last week. We're talking LNG terminals that could ship Canadian natural gas to hungry markets in Asia, clean energy infrastructure, port expansions, and resource corridors that could transform BC's economy. Eby's argument is straightforward and pretty compelling. If Ottawa can commit to a September 2027 construction date for a pipeline that still doesn't have a proponent or even a final route, then surely they can show the same urgency for projects that already check all those boxes. On Tuesday, Eby put it plainly. British Columbia backs Canada. Now Ottawa needs to back British Columbia. The province that this pipeline must cross is tired of being left out of the big conversations. That dynamic changes today. Imagine for a second what this pipeline could unlock. 1 million barrels per day heading to Pacific Tidewater. At current world oil prices above $100 a barrel, that's over $37 billion in annual revenue. We're talking royalties, taxes, jobs, and economic spin-off that could rival the GDP of entire provinces. British Columbia literally sits right in the middle of that prize. They control the land, the approvals, the environmental assessments. That's real leverage. And Eby knows it. Carney knows it too. That's why instead of making grand announcements from Ottawa, he's in Vancouver having this face-to-face. The southern route would go through the Fraser River Valley and the Lower Mainland. The northern route heads toward Prince Rupert through the Skeena watershed, some of the most environmentally sensitive areas in the province. Either way, BC has its own environmental assessment process that runs separately from the federal one. Ottawa can't just waive a national interest designation and override everything. Provincial authority over land use is real and protected, so Carney needs Eby to at least say yes, or at minimum, not stand in the way. And the price of that yes is becoming very clear. federal support for BC's $88 billion in projects at the same level Alberta received. Carney was careful after the Calgary announcement. He said Ottawa and Alberta would work with BC. Well, today is the day those words get tested in real time. This might be one of the most important provincial negotiations in Canada's energy history, and it's happening right now. Let's connect this to the bigger picture because nothing in Canadian politics happens in isolation these days. We've got 42 days left until the CUSMA deadline, that critical trade agreement with the United States and Mexico. American officials have warned Canada not to use energy as a bargaining chip, but here we are anyway. Canada went ahead and signed this Alberta pipeline deal. The thing is, its value as leverage depends entirely on whether it can actually get built. A pipeline agreement that falls apart in BC is just a press release. It's not real leverage. Every day that BC and Ottawa negotiate publicly, Washington is watching closely. If Carney walks out of today's meeting with Eby's support, or even his quiet neutrality, this pipeline suddenly looks very real. Markets will react, trading partners will take notice, but if Eby remains publicly opposed, that July 1st deadline starts looking more like political theater than a serious plan. Canada's strongest hand at the trade table is when this project is clearly moving forward. Today's meeting in Vancouver is part of that larger strategy, even if no one says Trump's name out loud in the room. Now, let's dig deeper into what Eby's BC projects actually represent and why Carney has every reason to say yes. These aren't pie-in-the-sky ideas. BC's 34 projects include LNG terminals that could export Canadian gas to Asia right when global supply is tight, especially with facilities like Qatar's Ras Laffan still dealing with disruptions. They include clean energy corridors that help Canada meet its climate goals while growing the economy. They include port upgrades that would support the existing Trans Mountain pipeline, which is already running full and bringing in record revenue for the country. Saying yes to BC's projects doesn't hurt the Alberta pipeline. It actually completes it. You need ports. You need supporting infrastructure. You need cooperation at every level. A federal government that backs both Alberta's oil ambitions and BC's broader vision isn't playing favorites. It's building a complete, resilient energy system for the entire country. Carney gets this. In his speech this morning to the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, right before sitting down with Eby, he kept repeating the phrase, "one Canadian economy." He talked about diversifying exports, building westward, and reducing our dependence on any single market. Those words weren't just for the business crowd. They were carefully chosen for the premier sitting across the table an hour later. But let's be honest about what remains uncertain, because this story isn't simple. Even if Eby signals strong cooperation today, BC's environmental assessment process for a new pipeline will take serious time. The July 1st federal deadline doesn't magically speed that up. Environmental groups and some First Nations communities in BC have already voiced opposition to any new major pipeline, regardless of the route chosen. Public hearings, studies, consultations. These things don't happen overnight. On top of that, the Alberta pipeline still lacks a committed private sector proponent. Carney has talked about a national interest designation by October 1st, but ultimately a company has to make that final investment decision and put up the capital. Without real private money ready to move, all the provincial goodwill in the world won't break ground. And then there's the carbon pricing precedent. The separate industrial carbon price Ottawa gave Alberta outside the normal national framework has raised eyebrows. Now other premiers, including Eby, are looking for their own tailored deals. If every province starts negotiating its own climate rules, Canada's national approach starts to look pretty fragmented. That's a real risk coming out of the Calgary Agreement, and today's meeting in Vancouver will either help manage it or make it worse. Think about the human side of all this too. For workers in Alberta, this pipeline means continued jobs and stability in the energy sector. For communities in British Columbia, it could mean massive new investment in clean projects, ports, and infrastructure that creates opportunities for years to come. But it also means balancing environmental concerns that people in BC care deeply about. Rivers, forests, wildlife, coastal ecosystems, these aren't abstract issues. People live there. They vote there. Eby has to represent those voices. Carney, on the other hand, is playing a high-stakes national game. He needs to show progress on energy security and economic growth while keeping the country unified. One Canadian economy isn't just a slogan. It's the challenge of making sure Alberta's resources and BC's strategic location work together instead of against each other. The tension is real, but so is the opportunity. As this meeting wraps up, the outcome will send ripples across the country. Will we see real momentum on the pipeline with BC fully on board? Will those $88 billion in BC projects get the green light and the same federal enthusiasm? Or will we see more public back and forth that delays everything? With the CUSMA clock ticking down, the pressure is enormous. Canada can't afford to fumble this one. Whatever comes out of Vancouver today will tell us a lot about whether Canada's most important infrastructure push moves forward or gets stuck in provincial politics. The stakes are high, the dollars are enormous, and the clock is running. Thanks for watching.